my agent's phone started ringing, and then that's when the Atlanta Falcons picked me up as an undrafted free agent for the exciting sum of $0.
Three, two, one, yeah.
All right, welcome to Willing to Fail. I'm your host, Peyton Bennett. Today we got a very special guest. He is a former back-to-back Pac-12 champion with the Oregon Ducks, that same team who made it to the national championship. He was also an undrafted free agent and ended up playing 3 years for the Atlanta Falcons. Now he is a business owner. He owns Quality Over Quantity, life coaching and consulting. With no further ado, Drew Davis, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Peyton. How about you?
Pretty good. Like we were chatting off camera, you've crossed paths with a lot of my former guests, and just for me personally, dude, I think anyone who just makes it to the NFL in general is an elite athlete, always the best of their town. And I think the story's not always told of like really what the path is like for a majority of the NFL players, because from the media standpoint, you only hear about the superstars. So for you, I know you were a superstar since you were a kid. Where'd you grow up and what was your childhood like?
Well, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, a place called Montbello, a small town, small community by the airport. And life for me growing up, I got put in baseball first, played baseball. Baseball was the first sport I played. Really loved baseball, wanted to play football. My mom was afraid that I was going to get hurt, but little did she know I was one of the biggest kids out there. So my baseball coach is also my football coach. So finally he got me onto their team. Started off playing running back through Little League. And then once we got to high school, played quarterback and wide receiver. And I just continued to excel. That's when I really figured out, I was like, yo, I want to go to the NFL. I want to play football after high school. So, and I also don't want to have my parents pay for it. And we didn't have the money to pay for it as far as attending college. And then, so I just got into football a lot. I was in the weight room when I wasn't in season. I was always practicing with my coach on the weekend. He had a pretty good arm, so he was able to be my quarterback while I ran routes. And I just did a lot of that stuff in the off season, during the season, to be a great player. And I just knew I always wanted to take football further, and I knew I had the talent. And so I just had to put the hard work and couple that with the hard work to see what it could come to.
Yeah, you said you were like always bigger than everybody. At what age did you realize, like, man, I'm a little bit different than most of these other kids?
At 8 years old, I figured that out. Like I said, we were playing on this team, and at that point, we had a weight limit. There's a weight limit in Colorado as far as how far you can, how much you can weigh before you're a patch player. You have to play on the offensive or defensive line. And I remember we were going into weigh-ins, like it was a week of weigh-ins, and the coach just started running me extra and kind of not giving me water at practice and stuff. And I'm like, hold on. They're like, hey, we just have to make sure that you're under 80 pounds. And at that point, I'm like right on the line of 80 pounds. But everything went well. I was able to make weight. And the interesting thing happened when I started playing football. They would give the ball to somebody on first down. They would give it to somebody else on third down. They would hand it to somebody else and try to throw it to somebody else on third down. And then on fourth down, they would give it to me on we called it a 48 sweep. And I usually scored or got a first down or something like that. So that's when I really realized, like, I think I'm a special young man.
Yeah. Okay. Then you transitioned. You said in high school you were playing quarterback and receiver. I mean, obviously it seems pretty tough to do both at the same time. So where did you start specializing in receiver?
I started specializing in receiver after my freshman year of high school. It was crazy because I still played running back and receiver on the freshman team. We played freshman JV varsity, but I pretty much only suited up for varsity. So for varsity, I was playing quarterback, and I was probably like the third or fourth string quarterback or something like that. I think I maybe got in 1 or 2 games. But we're playing, the freshman game is usually on Saturday, the JV game is usually on Friday, and the varsity game is on Saturday as well. So if we just had anything that was offsetting, or like I was usually at 2 games a week, sometimes 3 when it worked out for us. But I pretty much started to specialize in receiver, as well as, sometimes it's hard to play receiver because there aren't that many quarterbacks with a great arm out there. And so I played running back freshman year because they want to make sure they can get you the ball. They want to make sure they can draw plays for you. And we had a pretty good offense and a pretty good system in high school. And so we had a couple quarterbacks, so it wasn't that big of a problem.
At that point, were you just specialized in football or were you still playing baseball?
I played baseball on and off in high school. My freshman year, I got into a fight in the bathroom. I hate to say that, but the worst part about it was I hit the wall and I broke my fifth metacarpal. And so that knocked me out of baseball for my freshman year. So I played my sophomore year, and then my sophomore year and my junior year. But then I also graduated early, so I couldn't play senior year before I went to college. So played 2 out of my 4 years in high school. And but like I said, when I kind of figured out in high school that I really liked to play football, and so baseball was something I still enjoyed, but football, I knew that's where like I wanted to go to college and do this. So I knew that baseball at that point was just secondary.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I'm sure you're getting like notices from colleges. You're getting noticed, like getting scholarship offers. Like, are there coaches or parents in your ear telling you like, don't play baseball, don't do anything else, just focus on football?
There was only one. It was my wide receiver coach, and he was pretty much just telling me he knew how much I liked football, and I think he also didn't know how good of a baseball player I was. I think he thought I was just playing to play, and it was kind of funny. We talk about this till this day. He's pretty much family. He's a great family friend. Yeah, I still call him coach. He's like a big brother to me. And I remember I invited him to a baseball game my sophomore year, and he shows up and I go up to bat and our outfield, I think it was like 405 to straightaway center field. And I remember I got a probably a waist high fastball and just jumped on it and took it deep to center field, no doubt about it. And I'm rounding the bases, I'm smiling because I know he's there, and I'm like, all right, like, hope you know how good at baseball I am now. And we still tell the story to this day where he was like, all right, like once you did that, I was like, okay, he might actually be good in both sports.
So I saw you had 4.0 GPA throughout high school, and you got 26 different offers. Like, what made you choose Oregon, and what was your recruiting process like?
Honestly, I don't know what made me choose Oregon. The same coach I just talked about when we were looking at schools and we were narrowing it down. He was like, you know what, just check out Oregon. The owner of Nike's from there, and just go look at all the Nike stuff and just have a fun trip. Um, the recruiting process for me happened a little bit quicker. I know there's a lot of young men that are out here graduating early now, like it's the normal thing to do. But back when I was coming up, we only had like a couple people graduating earlier. It was the far-fetched thing to do, I would say. And so for me, I had to take all my trips. I took 4 trips. We got to take 5, but my 4 official visits, I took those to Washington, Cal, Oregon, and UCLA. And as I was going through those, it ended up just being Pac-10 and staying on the Pac-10 because I knew they'd like to throw the football. So being a receiver, that was good for me. But knowing I had to make this decision earlier, I had to like really just jump on it. Like it wasn't going into, February or March and that signing day. And so pretty much for me, I had to focus on that. I had to focus on passing or taking my ACT and SAT because at that time, Stanford wanted me to take the SAT if I was going to go there. Gladly, I didn't score high enough, so Stanford came off the list. But for me, and like I said, you said 4.0, I'd seen so many people in my high school who were more talented than me that ended up either not going to a big college or not going to school at all. So for me, I didn't want grades to be the thing that held me back and hindered me. And also, my parents didn't play that. Like, they wouldn't even let me bring home B's for the most part. So that's why I was so focused in school because I thought it was so hard to get from high school to college rather than college to the NFL. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't overlooked by a thing like grades.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah, you're talking about talent. That Oregon team you were on had a ton of talent. I mean, by the time it was your senior year, you guys saw 17 players on that roster that made it to the NFL, including you. So, I mean, you're no short of talent there. What was but I know it's not just you go there and you just play in the national championship. There's a lot of grinding and hard work that goes through that. And I know you had some adversity your first start, like at Stanford. Like, what was your process of dealing with injuries and kind of like battling to stay on the field?
Man, it's tough because you're like you said, you're a standout in high school and you go to college and then you're not starting right away or you're barely playing and you're wondering like, man, I thought I was just supposed to continue this on to the next level. But I just had a lot of people around me. I had one very good friend who was my high school coach's brother. His name's Marcus Houston. He was a pretty good running back, number 1 running back in the nation when he was coming out of high school. And one thing he said is when you go up a couple levels, he said the only thing that changes is really about being consistent and being more consistent. And that's what he said from high school to college and college to the NFL. But when I got hurt in college after my very first start, that kind of broke me. And that was my sophomore year. And it was a matter of like, wow, I worked so hard to get to this point, and then all of a sudden, on one play in the back of the end zone where the DB runs into me a little bit wrong, and my leg is stuck in the ground, and now I have to start over from square one. And it's not only starting over from square one, but you're like, is my body going to heal and get back to where it was before I got hurt? And being a person who's in a skill position like a running back, a wide receiver, a quarterback, I think we worry about it a lot more because for me, it's about getting in and out of breaks. It's about explosiveness. It's about speed. And so if a couple of those things are hindered, or I can't get out of my break fast enough for the DB to jump on the ball, then I might think about changing positions. But it's really with that adversity, it helped me learn a lot about myself, just as far as what I really wanted to do in life, and maybe take a step back and say, okay, if I didn't have football, then what else would I do? And that's when I started working on things outside of the building a lot, like community service and going to networking events and things like that, because I saw how quickly football could be taken away from me. But for the most part, it taught me that like I've always been a hard worker, and in hard work has never been a stranger to me. We're very close friends. We know each other by first name basis. We even have nicknames for each other. But it was a matter of being like, all right, well, if you want to get back to the point you were at, well, then put in this time in the off season. And I remember then I was doing, sometimes when you're hurt, the trainers only allow you to do a certain amount of things, and then your weightlifting coach only allows you to do certain things. So you're kind of hindered. And my high school coach, who was my mentor, was like, all right, well, since we can't work out lower body, we're going to put you together a weightlifting regimen, and, you're going to go to the student rec center on campus, at the end of the day. So I'm going and doing my football workouts and then doubling back and going in the evening to the student rec center. And that's when I got the weightlifting bench record for wide receivers at the University of Oregon, because I was doing so much upper body work during that off-season time period when I had my torn ACL. But it was just me saying, okay, well, since I can't work legs right now, let me just get bigger, stronger. And by the time I come back, I'll have something else, another facet in my belt that I can pull out when it's time to perform.
Yeah, that's awesome to have something like so catastrophic happen to you at such a young age to be able to just turn that into such a positive. Because yeah, you're right. The perspective of like, probably at that point, you're what, like 19, 20 years old when you tear your ACL?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So you're just like a kid where in your mind, like football is your whole world. Like that's what you're going to do your whole life probably. And I think it's great were you learning anything about, like, you said you were focusing on what you kind of wanted to do if football was taken away from you. What, outside of like rehabbing and bench pressing, what were you doing that helped you like work towards something that you could do after football?
Honestly, I started to pour into my schoolwork a little bit more too. It's no secret that when you're a student athlete, you're kind of siloed. So, the classes that you go to, you look for your friends who are mostly on the football team, basketball team, baseball team, whatever it might be. And those are the people you hang around. Those are the people you know. So a lot of times we don't take the time to get to know the students, or I don't want to call them regular students, like they're just not that they're not important. But I mean, like, you hang around the people the people that you have stuff in common with. And at this time, I decided to major in psychology. And I did that because I was always asking myself questions about how the mind worked. I was kind of sometimes giving people advice based upon what their situation was. So I always kind of like helping people. And by me looking into psychology more, I was like, well, I think psychology is awesome. I started looking into sports psychologists, and we had one that actually worked for us at the University of Oregon. And I was like, yo, if I wasn't able to play sports, I think the next best thing would be to still be around sports and to help student athletes and people that are going through things like an injury, whether it's a short-term one or a long-term one. And honestly, we all need somebody to talk to, in daily life, or just how life goes when things aren't going too well. And so that's when I kind of got on the track to psychology and really figuring out what that was and what that meant. And then I just really like to have that in my pocket, to where I was like, you know what? I'm not going to use it as a time to say this is when everything went to hell, but this was a time where I got more clarity in what I wanted to do and how I wanted my life to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome how like blessings in disguise like that happened, because I mean, you did go on, you're doing the life consulting, you went on to be director of player development, like you went down that path and you went through those hardships and learned all that stuff about yourself. But looking back, it really, I mean, it was only your sophomore year, right? I mean, I know it's detrimental to get hurt in your first year, but that's probably when you would prefer to get hurt, when you got another couple of years to prove yourself at Oregon, right? So what was it like when you finally got back on the field?
When I finally got back on the field, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I was back to 100% and I was good and I was myself. Like I said, being a receiver, the speed didn't come back for me right away. And I would do things like we had a great strength coach by the name of Coach Radcliffe. I was about to call him by his name, but his name is Jimmy Radcliffe, and he's world renowned. And he's, we do a lot of Olympic lifts and the stuff we do. So we practice on a lot of fast twitch muscles, being fast, being explosive. And I just remember like I didn't have that gear that I had before I got hurt. And honestly, that didn't come back around. I got injured in November of that year. And then the next year, I didn't feel 100% until we were doing bowl game practices in December. So, no, it was pretty much a year and some change. But I also, with being injured and having football taken away from me, I really got to see how much I really enjoyed football. And it's not all fun and games, and it's not all, unicorns and rainbows. But, you go to practice, it's hard, it's early in the morning, then you have to, our hardest days of practice are, Tuesday, Wednesday, or really heavy full padded practices. And I found myself that instead of saying, I have to do this, I started saying, I get to do this. And I was a person that was at practice that even if I wasn't super happy to be there, I'd be like, well, this time last year you were hurt and you were, doing physical therapy in the training room. You weren't even out here practice. And so for me, it helped my mental clarity to really say, okay, this game could be taken away from me at any moment. You never know when that moment is. So what are you going to do to enjoy this moment, to enjoy this practice, enjoy this game, enjoy this time with your fellow wide receivers here on the field? And it gave me this different outlook to just come to practice, be prepared, do the best I could that day, and then kind of just hang my head and see where I was. So it was a journey, but it was a good journey because I think I opened up and I was a better human being rather than just a better athlete who's back on the football field.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easy to complain about football practice if you don't have that perspective. So I know that stuff can get really hard. Every time I talk to former players, I'm like, I mean, I wasn't that athletic as a kid. I played a little bit of baseball and football, but like, it reminds me of how brutal just like high school workouts were. I can't imagine what college football workouts were like.
And then imagine doing those at 5 or 6 in the morning too. So
Okay, so then that's the bowl season where you finally feel 100%. And then going into your senior year, do you feel like you're at 100% and playing your best football?
yeah, I felt like I was great going in my senior year. I felt that we were great. Like that was the first time we went to the Rose Bowl since the 95-96 season. Like you said, we had a lot of talent there. We had a really good team. And it's kind of funny when I chose to go to Oregon, I was never like, oh, we're going to win Pac-10 championships and compete for national championships. I was like, all right, we're going to go wear some cool jerseys. We're going to put up some points. And then I'm also get a degree. So I think that's pretty cool. Going into to our senior year, I think we saw what we could do. We saw what we were capable of. We had a lot of people that were coming back. We had some younger people, younger talented players that were going to get to play more. And so we were looking at it like, okay, well, can we get back to the Pac-12, Pac-10 championship again? And how far can we take this? We had Tennessee on our schedule for that upcoming year. And so we were really going to get some matchups to see like, all right, how good are we as a team and how good is the Pac-10?
Yeah, I mean, that you guys went on a hell of a run. So at what point in the season were you guys, because like you said, you didn't come to a powerhouse to win national championships. Like that wasn't the expectation when you got there. At what point in the season where you guys started to look around each other in the locker room and be like, we could do it this year? Like when did the belief, you feel like, really start to kick in?
To be honest, I think the belief of winning another Pac-12 championship or competing for one came up like halfway during the year. But Coach Kelly was so good at making us focus on just one day at a time, one game at a time, one week at a time. And, as players, you kind of look at the schedule and you're like, all right, we're probably going to beat them. We're probably going to beat them. I'm a realist, and I'm always like, all right, the game that you count as a for sure W is the one that you might catch an L because college football and just life in general, you walk into a game, you're comfortable, you're like, all right, let's just do what we do, and that's the time you get your ass kicked. Excuse my language. But honestly, I just think we stayed focused for the most part, and it was kind of just like we got Pac-10 championship rings the year before, so we're like, all right, cool. If we win the Pac-10 this year and we're playing a good ball game, we're gonna be able to get 2 rings. So that was kind of the hype around the people that I were talking to, my friends. But I would say once it got later into the year and we were like looking up and probably had 2 or 3 games left, and you look at the rankings and we're like ranked third or fourth or second, and you're like, okay, like now it's starting to come all together. Like if we just take care of it and we win. And back then we didn't have a Pac-10 championship game to play, so it was like if you won or you were at the top of the division during that at the end of the year, you were going to be okay. And so I want to say like 2 or 3 games left in the season, you start to look over to people and you can see that they were like, all right, we got a chance to do something special. We got a chance to do something that hasn't been done at this school. And I think not that we got uptight. I think we were more like, okay, well, let's go be the first team to do this.
Yeah. I mean, you guys went on a great run and then just ended up running into a juggernaut and then in the national championship, one of the greatest college players of all time. But what in that prep, so you win the Pac-10, and then I know that was in the BCS era, so you have like a month from your last game, maybe even more until that national championship game. What are practices like at that point with Chip Kelly? Are you guys still going full speed? Are you guys taking breaks for the holidays? What was that month like?
We're still going full speed, but the thing about the college schedule or the thing about playing in the latest game is that there's still NCAA regulations. And so, I think once we learned we were in that game, we had some discretionary period where we had to worry about classes and finals and not so much football. But then once that ended, it was back to football. If I remember correctly, it was either Christmas or New Year's. We got one of those off or during that time frame to go back home. So but to me, bowl game practice is the most relaxing because you're not in school. You really don't have, classes to worry about anymore. Even though you have football practice, they don't take up your whole day. You still go there for, 4 to 6 hours in the building. So you still can feel like a regular human being. For us and for me, it was more so getting my family situated to come out and make it to the game. Being able to come to the realization like, yo, this is my very last college football game that I'm going to be able to play. And I don't know if my career is going to continue after this. So hopefully we can get this W and win this championship and ride off into the sunset. But the time of bowl game practice is just a lot more, for me, it was a lot more chill and your body got to recover more. So for us, for practice, you go out there, you give it your all, knowing that, all right, cool, we're not going to sit here and practice 15, 20 days straight. We might practice 3 days on, 1 day off, and then continue. So the bowl game practice was pretty interesting, like I said, because we were getting to play in our very first national championship, and it was something that I'll never forget.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome too, because like you said, that's what I was gonna ask, because that's your last college football game, period, and it's at the biggest stage. Like, what are your? I know it didn't end the way you wanted it to, but what are some of like the biggest memories from that game that stick out to you?
Honestly, like we played a very good game. And both teams had some turnovers. Like we were slow getting started, which was surprising to me. I thought it'd be a high scoring game. But if you're a football fan, you can see what a month does for some teams. Like for us defensively and for them defensively, I think it was a great thing for game planning because they got to take away some things from the other team or from us that were pretty much our bread and butter. But honestly, just the way we fought, it seemed like it was getting real bleak there. We're coming down to the end. It looks like Auburn's going to be able to run out the clock. One of our linebackers, Casey Matthews, makes a great play, knocks the ball out. We recover the fumble. We're able to go down, convert on the fourth down, score, convert on a 2-point conversion. And so just those moments of what you think college football is, what you think football is, it's right there. The things that you guys have talked about all year, the things that you've talked about doing, about, making plays when they count, about not getting nervous and letting the moment be too big for you. You pretty much saw throughout that game our players making plays and just doing what we've been doing all year. And that's believing in each other, leaning on each other, and knowing that we're all going to be able to do our job. So unfortunately, an elbow wasn't down somewhere during that game. And they ended up being able to kick a field goal and win it. But at the end of the day, we played in our school's first national championship. We played in one more since then, lost that one again to Ohio State. So hopefully we're due soon, but I'm just glad to say that we started off and we're kind of at that beginning point for Oregon football to really be national and prominent.
Yeah, you're right. That was like definitely the tipping point of like now Oregon's a every year powerhouse. So all right. So then you have that loss. What's going on in your mind? Is that are you thinking about playing football again in your mind? Is that your last football game you're going to play, or are you expecting to make the NFL, or is that just like a dream? What is your mindset like after that game going forward?
Honestly, I let myself stew in that loss for about a week. Like I said, the thing for my student athletes out there, the people that watch this, when you finish your last college game, it's kind of weird because you don't have coaches calling you to come to workouts, or you don't have any set schedule to be somewhere. You're pretty much just on your own, like you're on vacation. And if you don't have the right discipline in place to be like, all right, I still have classes to go to, I still have work to do, assignments to do, or whatever like that, You can just wake up every day at whatever time you want, roll out of bed when you want, do what you want during the day. So for me, I let myself stew in that loss for about a week or a couple of days when we got back. And then I was still taking classes, so I had to decide if I was going to keep theater arts as my minor or if I was going to drop a couple classes. And the senioritis kicked in really bad for me. And I was kind of like, all right, I could take these online classes, get my degree in psychology and be done. But during this time, I was like, okay, do I go train somewhere for the upcoming pro day? Like, I didn't get an invite to the NFL Combine. Okay, so now what are the next steps? And so for me, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go pay to go somewhere and train and not knowing if my NFL career is going to come to fruition. So, like I said, our Coach Radcliffe, he was able to train a lot of us who probably were going to be undrafted or just weren't high level guys. And his training is still some of the best, some of the top of the line. But like I said, once you finish playing, it's kind of weird because you're not on the team, but you're still around the facility, and then you still have friends that are on the team. And so pretty much I just stuck to like, okay, cool. We're going to finish up these classes. We're going to go train at the facility in the morning and do our little conditioning session in the evening. And then when pro day comes up in March, we'll do that and we'll see where we stand. Also, that year was a year that the NFL lockout came as well. So once we came around to March and they kind of shut everything down, you're kind of wondering like, wow, is there going to be football this year? When is it going to kick back in? And so at that point, I had to have a game plan. And like I said, I pretty much finished college in March, left and went back to Denver and started working a couple different jobs just because I didn't know what football was going to be. But I was still working out back home in Denver, like I said, with my high school coach who still has a good arm. And I was just kind of waiting to see what was going to happen and how the dominoes were going to fall.
Gotcha. So at that point, are you hiring an agent or you're just working?
I had an agent. It was funny because I talked to him before I started my senior year, and then once I went through my senior year, and we kept talking, communicating because it was illegal for me to sign with him while I was still playing. But once we got to the end of that, nobody else really called as far as agents went. And so that could be a good thing or a bad thing, whether they knew I had an agent or whether it was just like, oh, this guy's not good enough, so I'm not going to take a chance on him. And like you say, you only need one person to, take a shot at you to be able to move forward. And so I felt real comfortable with him because he was one of the first people to call me as I was going into my senior year. We kept a kind of working and communicating relationship as we went forward. And so I did have an agent where he would talk to me and tell me kind of what I needed to do, where I needed to score on pro day to be one of the people that would be looked at. And so that was pretty much a positive for me to have him and to be able to have somebody that I can talk to about what was coming up.
So he kind of gave you the expectations of like, this is what you need to do to get signed to a team if you don't get drafted. Is that kind of the thing?
Yeah, he was a lot like him because he was straight up with me. He was like, like you said, he looked at my stats and was like, all right, these aren't anything mind blowing. And that's what I talk to a lot of my young guys about. I say it matters what stats you have, but also like being on a good team can help you. Like we played in the national championship, the biggest game of the year, where all the scouts come to, where a lot of teams are looking at. And I made a couple plays in that game, which could be the difference of me, getting drafted or just being a high priority undrafted free agent. And just looking at that piece of everything, you're like, all right, well, if you go out there and you compete and you play, you're on a good team, good players get noticed. And that's one thing I can say, like if you're on somebody's radar, you can get noticed that way.
So for you, I mean, we always see like in media, like on NFL draft days, is big spectacular, like the top picks, and then you see the big disappointments. But like for someone like you, didn't have like the super high expectations. Like, are you watching the draft? Are you just like, what are those last couple of days of the draft, and what's your mental state going through that?
Oh, I'm definitely still watching the draft. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, well, somebody's gonna see the potential in me and call me and pick me up. And I think that's what goes on in a lot of athletes' head, no matter what your college career was kind of like. I had talked to a couple scouts at pro day, so it's not like I didn't have anybody say anything to me. Ran a really good time, did really good on some bench press reps. And I still watched pretty much the whole time with my parents, so they were kind of around. And I still watched, and I was just hoping that somebody would take a flyer, a late round pick on me. But at the end of the day, once all that happened and once all it broke down, I was pretty let down because I was just like, man, like it really, you never know how you're gonna feel until you get all the way through it, until it's done, until you didn't hear your name get called. And it was also very weird. Like I said, the lockout was still in place, so it wasn't that the draft ends and then my phone rang and this team tells me they want to bring me in because there was still no football. So even after that, it went even longer to the point where there was still more uncertainty because there was no football at all. So I didn't know if they're gonna have football this year. I don't know if I'm gonna get picked up in July, in August, or anything like that. So it's pretty much I just still continued to work out. Like I said, talk to my agent where he was letting me know, hey, it might end at this date, it might end at this date. And honestly, he didn't know because nobody knew. But safe to say that when it did end, the lockout ended, I want to say sometime in late July. And then that's when my phone started ringing, or my agent's phone started ringing. And then that's when the Atlanta Falcons picked me up as an undrafted free agent for the exciting sum of $0.
Oh man. What before we get into their contract and going with the Falcons, when you're training in Denver, does that give you an advantage with the altitude when you're going like you're training in Denver for 3 or 4 months? I know that's really big for Olympians and for swimmers, but for football, does it make that big a difference if you're training there for months, like that first couple of weeks you get back to, let's say, Atlanta?
I believe it does, but also I'm born and raised there. So like, these lungs are automatically adjusted to the mile high city. But I do like when I have friends come there, even if they're not playing sports, everybody's they either get a little bit of altitude sickness, or even when you go out for a run, you might get tired on a mile when you're usually not. I would say it helped, but then also just going to Atlanta is different where there's just so much humidity.
Yeah.
And my mom grew up in South Carolina, and so I know about the humidity, but when you're in Atlanta and you're practicing in 100-degree heat with 80% humidity, it sucks all around.
Yeah, I'm from Atlanta. I know what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, when I go to Denver, those areas, like I get the altitude sickness for sure. It's a whole nother world there. All right, so you get the call from Atlanta. Like I'm sure you're pumped about that, but it's obviously not a big signing bonus or anything. So what do they just sign you as, like a practice squad? What is the terms, and what are you trying to like? What's your expectation when you get there?
So they signed me as an undrafted free agent. Like I said, the lockout ended in July. So the bad thing about when this lockout ended for my first year, we didn't have a rookie mini camp, we didn't have OTAs, we didn't have a mini camp that we went to. And so once we get into camp, they're pretty much trying to get all their starters and the people that they know are going to be on their roster up to speed. They're like, we missed out on all these reps throughout this offseason. The preseason is going to look different because they're trying to get them ready for the season. So we didn't have that many shots to go in there and play and to be able to do something. And we also had limited amount of plays in practice as well. But the notion of me going there was a matter of like, Julio Jones was drafted that year. They gave up, I think it was 5 or 7 picks to get Julio and move up. And so you're walking into a receiver room with Julio Jones, Roddy White, Harry Douglas. You got Tony Gonzalez at tight end. Like there's a lot of talent there. So you're not just going to come in and just play wide receiver. But you have to be in camp to make plays. And that's when you really see the business of the NFL, because you're like, okay, like, like you said, you wanted to go and be a professional player, but you're only looking at, the people that get drafted, or you're only looking at the star players. You never kind of notice the fourth and fifth guys that are in the wide receiver room. And that's when you look around and say, okay, and you start to count the numbers and you're like, okay, well, we keep 5 or 6 receivers in training camp. There's about 12 of us here. And so you look around and you're like, all right, where am I going to be valuable? And I played special teams in college because our coaches told us that all the time. I was a very good blocker. So they had me on punt return and kick return, doing that type of stuff. Not that I loved it. But that's where you really have to figure out, like, yo, am I trying to play in the NFL, or am I trying to be a star in the NFL? Because there are already a lot of stars there. Granted, there's some people that are going to be able to be a star, but they got to kind of pay their dues first. So they got to have their opportunity to be a star. And so from that point, I was just like, all right, and it's funny, my trainer at Oregon, before I left, or even when he was talking to me my senior year, he was like, take every rep you can. If there's a vet that doesn't want to get in, you run in there, get on all the special teams reps, whether if it's on scout team, like show them that you're willing to work. And essentially, I think that was a thing that was highlighted while I was there, because it was like I made some plays on offense while I was here and on special teams. But at the end of the day, it was like, all right, who's the person that's always on this film? Who's the person that's always going, even when they don't have to? And I think that ended up being a big thing that helped me. I got cut my first year, but they put me on the practice squad. And so that just let me know, for those that don't know, it's kind of like redshirting in college. You're doing everything in practice. You're probably doing the hardest stuff as far as running all the reps on for the team that you're going to play. But that was valuable for me because it continued to help me with my work ethic. and then also not kind of getting too high where I'm like, yeah, I'm in the NFL. I don't really need to do anything. It kept me level headed to the point where I was like, all right, I still have a lot of work to do.
You think you still had that perspective that you had in college after being hurt of like just being grateful that you're even able to practice and play? Do you think that helped?
I definitely think that helped because, like I said, you're even though you're in the NFL, like it's sometimes it's a little bit demoralizing when you're signing autographs for kids and they're like, "Hey, what position do you play?" You're like, "Oh, I play wide receiver." Or, "Okay, well, are we gonna see you this next game?" Well, I don't really play in the games. Hold on, wait, you're on the team though, right? I'm like, "Yeah, but it's kind of like that." It did help me because it was that was my childhood dream to go and do that, and I was doing that. And sometimes we're like, "Hey, well, this is my childhood dream, but." I'm not starting or I'm not playing. So it's really not fulfilled yet. I was like, I'm here and I got here from a lot of hard work. I got here from after having a torn ACL. I got here from being in a lockout. I've been cut already. Like I've been through some of the worst stuff. Now I can still go up from here. And I think that was a good thing. I had good people around me. Another wide receiver at the time was Kevin Cohn, who was also on the practice squad with me. He went to Georgia Tech where they don't even throw the football. So I know he was never thinking that he could be in the NFL either. So I just kept these kind of people around me who were just not happy to be there, but who were content with getting there to that point and ready to take more when the opportunity arrives.
Yeah. So what for those who don't know, like what does a practice squad player do on game day Sundays? Like it's not like you're a red shirt. It's in college it's a little bit different. Or like are you just at home watching the game? Like what are you doing?
So for a person on the practice squad in the NFL, home games and away games are a little different. Teams do it differently. But for the Atlanta Falcons, we didn't go on road trips with them. So anytime there was an away game, we go to practice on a Saturday morning. We do our walkthrough, and then when everybody else was either getting ready to get on the bus to go to the airport, we were pretty much done. And so we had Saturday and pretty much Sunday off. We would watch the game at another person's house who was on the practice squad, or sometimes I just go into the city and watch a game and just watch my team. But if you're on the team and it's a home game, same thing as practicing on Saturday. You may or may not go down to the hotel with them when they go before the game. But pretty much you're supposed to show up on game day 2 hours before the game. You don't dress out. You're in sweats and just team apparel. And you're standing on the sidelines. But usually you're helping your coach, or you have a assigned responsibility to look at a certain position to see what they did on a certain play. So if I'm watching kickoff, I'm watching to see what the L4 did on that play, or did we get him blocked or anything like that. So you're still kind of working, but more in a coaching and information capacity. But for the most part, you're just there, cheering on your teammates, cheering on your team, and hoping you get the win so you can get a victory Monday.
So one and then so that was your basically your whole first season. That was the whole 2011 season. And then 2012, right, you're going in that's when you finally go into like OTAs and that kind of stuff. Are the expectations that like, oh, I'm still gonna work to try to make on the roster, or are they because I know a lot of times they'll move like take practice squads players from other teams. Like what are your expectations? Is just to stay with the Falcons and try to work your way up there? Is that what your agent's been telling you?
Yeah, my expectation was to pretty much get a spot on the roster. Practice squad was fine for the first year, like I said, with everything we went through as far as the lockout and just not being drafted and all that other stuff. But the more I looked at it, the more I was like, I have the talent to play at this level. I told myself that. I was like, looking at the players. Now I'm not a Julio Jones. I'll admit that firsthand. There's not many human beings walking this earth that can do half of the things Julio does. But I was like, I think I can find my niche and do some things to help this team win. And like I said, that's when special teams came up as far as something that's like, okay, I think I can make my way doing this. And one thing that I took to Atlanta that I also did in college is I learned every position. So I learned X, Z, Y, the slot, which is usually R. And then I even got to know what the running back did. And so the good thing about the NFL, like if you're that fourth or fifth guy, you have to know what everybody's doing because when somebody goes down, there's only five of you guys there. And so if you're the fourth or fifth guy, they're going to put you in those spots. So just during this other time, and I was like, okay, finally I get OTAs, I get a mini camp. Like those are very important because that's stuff we didn't get before. So just knowing things like what the site adjust is, if this person blitzes, like things like that. I was kind of my first year, I was just kind of guessing when we were in meetings because we didn't have that time to really formulate the playbook and what this protection means and how many people are in blocking and which way the running back goes. Like all that stuff came with a lot of time. And so during that time with OTAs and things like that, you're always sizing up your competition for the most part. You know it's a business. And I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and I was like, I think I can be the fourth or fifth best receiver in this room. And I just continued to show up and make plays on special teams in the preseason. And I got cut again, by the way, that next time. But it was funny because I got cut again, but the person that they chose in front of me got hurt the very first week and tore his hamstring as we're going into the game. I think we're playing Kansas City that first game. And he gets hurt, and then so I get pulled up off of the practice squad on Friday, and then I end up being on the roster for pretty much the whole year. So God did end up working things out, and that's the hard part about it. Sometimes there's some politics that are involved, because you can spend up to 2 years on practice squad. So they might have been like, okay, well, let's see if we can get another year out of him right here. But God had other plans, and I'm happy and I'm blessed for that.
Yeah, that's a roller coaster going from getting cut to called up. What was the most exciting part about getting called up? Was it getting that phone call, or was it actually being on the sideline, or actually getting onto the field? Like, what was your fondest memory of like your first NFL game day experience?
It was actually getting on the field. Like I said, I got called up that Friday. I go up to the office, sign the paperwork, make the travel trip. Oh, by the way, let me tell you about this. So even though this is before we went, so the rookies the rookies are the youngest people, the older guys, depending on what position you play, they make you bring something on the road trip. And so our thing that Roddy and them wanted was Popeye's chicken. So we had to go to Popeye's chicken and get, I don't know what it was, maybe the family meal where it was like 30 or $40, biscuits, all that stuff. And you have to do that, after practice. So you're rushing to get all this stuff done. You're making sure the order's ready. You go pick it up, you bring it to the plane, and then maybe like 10 pieces of chicken get eaten. But since we were the youngest and we had just started traveling, we had to do those kind of lower totem pole duties for the plane. But honestly, it was the first game. It was being in Kansas City, one of the loudest stadiums of the NFL, and then actually going in for your first play, whether that's on kickoff or kick return or punt return, and really playing and being like, okay, this is a lot more. It's a lot different than practice. Like, okay, we're really here now. And we won that game, so I won the very first NFL game that I was able to play in, which was good. We had a very good year that year, but it was very surreal just being able to put on the jersey pregame and everything that you go through during pregame and going out on the field and just the buzz around the football game with the crowd, the energy, just everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, as a Falcons fan, I remember that 2012 season pretty well. I mean, it was a special team. I mean, the expectations were high. Like, right, you said Julio coming in, like having Tony Gonzalez. At that point, Roddy White's become like a veteran, and Matt Ryan's doing his thing. And then you have like Michael Turner, I think, was at that point, right? So it's like,
Yep.
that was a really great team that fell a little bit short towards the end. But what is something that you learned, like, just as humans, I guess, from some of those like elite level athletes like Tony Gonzalez or those guys? What are some stuff that you learned that you still kind of carry with you today?
Man, it's funny because watching Tony, man, you would never know Tony Gonzalez is a Hall of Famer. Just the way he carries himself around the building, he takes care of his body. He was one of the first people to talk to me in the training room one day, and then that's when he found out I went to Oregon. He went to Cal, so we have that Pac-10 connection. But you really see the professionalism. There's a lack of it with some people. There's some people that still just, show up, don't stretch, just hit the field. And then there's some people that have a regiment of what they do. I can say like Tom Brady-esque, where a dude who still won all this stuff for the very best at his position is still doing all this stuff to prep and get his body ready and get his mind right. And one thing about Tony is, even though Tony's never played on special teams, and we used to have two stretching groups. So if you were on like special teams and part of like the first practice, you had to be out there for a stretch, earlier than like the starters. So, Julio and all them would come out, 10 or 15 minutes later, do their own special stretch on the side. And then when we started going as a practice as a whole, then we start moving. But Tony would always be out there early, and all he was doing, he was running like the top of his route. He'd have somebody throwing him the ball. He'd be taking 2 steps, pretty much coming out of his break and just catching the ball and tucking it away. And he would do that maybe, 50 or 100 catches, but that's what he would do before practice. And I remember hearing him talk a while ago, and he was like, his first year in the league, he dropped a lot of balls, like he wasn't very good. And I was like, you? And he was like, yeah. So like, it lets you know that even though people with talent get to a certain level, that when you had hiccups, when you had obstacles you had to overcome, you start a regiment of doing the simple things over and over and over again. And so till this day, I probably only seen Tony Gonzalez drop two balls in a real game. Like rarely saw anything dropped at practice too. But like it's a high level of performance, but it's not just based on talent, it's based upon the hard work and the consistency that they put into it.
Yeah. Makes it, yeah, because you had a good mix on that team of like the really young superstars like Julio and then the older vets of like meshing together. Had to be a fun, exciting season. What was your fondest memory of that season? Was it just the you first getting on the field, you think?
If it's a 2012 season, I would say it's actually I caught my first touchdown that year, and we're playing up in Philadelphia. I think we were undefeated at the time. I like to say that we were the people that helped Andy Reid get fired from Philly. Um, but I caught my first touch. I caught my first NFL pass for the regular season in that game, and I caught my first touchdown of my NFL career in that game, and I did them both on the first drive. And so that's probably my most memorable memory of that season. And I was playing and starting that game because the guy in front of me had got hurt as well. And so, like, all these opportunities that came up because somebody got hurt, and that's what life is, and that's sometimes what sports is. But it's also being ready when those opportunities come to you. So those are my fondest memories of that year was catching that first touchdown pass. I had so many text messages and so many people calling and excited. So for me, even though it was a big moment for me, it was even bigger because I have all these people that are rooting for me back home in Denver and college teammates and just teammates in general. So that let me know, like, man, you're really doing something really good.
Yeah, I bet like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like for you, you have all these like kind of steps. You're like, let's say your dream is to be an NFL player. It's not like what we see on TV. You just are an NFL player. Like you said, you're a practice squad player. So you're like, I'm kind of there. And then you're like, then you put the uniform on. So I'm guessing for you, the moment of you feeling like you are an NFL player came at that point, right, where you're putting the uniform on, you're playing on the field. But I guess for your friends and family, when it became the real is when they're seeing you on TV scoring a touchdown. Like that's probably when they're realizing their dream of their friend or family who making the NFL. Okay, so then yeah, you guys have that rough ending. You lose the NFC Championship to San Francisco. And then you're coming back. What are the kind of the expectations for you going into the next season?
For me, going into next season, to do the same, to keep my position, because when you talk about sports and you talk about football, like we know there's very few times in life where you're just like, this is a business, and if they can get somebody in here to replace me, they will. But that's also like that there are other people that want that spot that you have that are just waiting for you to either mess up or get hurt and things like that. It's kind of normal. So for me, it was to get better. It was to get faster, get a little bit stronger, know the playbook more, know what I was doing more, and really get a feel of being out on the field. Um, Going into that year was like, and just as a team, we were like, okay, cool. We got to the NFL championship. We have mostly the same team. Like we can do this again, or like it's very likely that we can get back there. And that's the thing with football, like you just never know. And that next year we just had a lot of injuries. Julio gets hurt. Roddy had a high ankle sprain from the preseason that he pretty much played with all year. I think that was a year our offensive line was decimated, I think, where there were just a lot of people injured. And it's just like that in sports sometimes where you go from, everything looking very on the upside in training camp and in the off season, and then you get through training camp and you get to the year and it's like, man, this year needs to end. Like, who is it's pretty tough. But just for me, it was about keeping that position. It was about getting better. It was about getting more trust from my coaches, more trust from Matt, because if the quarterback likes you and he's, hey, get in here on this play, like that's when like, okay, cool, I'm growing, I'm doing some great things.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that yeah, it was a frustrating year as a fan too, because like you remember hearing the stories of like Tony Gonzalez wanting to retire, and then his son telling him like, dude, you were so close, you got to come back, and then comes back and we're not close at all. And then I know we bring in Steven Jackson, who I just had on recently, and he was telling from his perspective, he's like, oh yeah, they were just in the NFC Championship. I'm gonna come in there and we're gonna be great. And didn't quite go like that. What was it like having Steven Jackson as a teammate?
Man, it was so great having Steve as a teammate. Like I said, growing up, I was watching him. He went to Oregon State. I went to Oregon, so we got to talk stuff there. Not at that time. He was before me. He's an OG. But watching him on TV and then being able to see him in person, like I tell a lot of people, they're just like, NFL players and athletes are regular people. And I think even though I played football, once you meet some of these people, you're a little bit starstruck at the beginning, but you're like, wow, this dude is big. Like, I see why nobody tackles him. And the great thing about Steve is his locker and my locker were right next to each other. And when Steve got there, Steve is like me. He's a little bit quiet. He's reserved. He's peeping out the scene to see who's who, to see who rocks with who. And I just remember one time I was sitting in my locker and I started to talk to him and I kind of was like, you just like me. And he was kind of looking at me like, yeah, what you mean? I'm like, you quiet, but you're looking at everything that's going on around you and you're peeping what it is and what it isn't. And he looked at me and he was like, okay. And so I think that's the point where me and him were like, all right, we're going to be good friends. But just having somebody who was in the NFL for a long time, who played at a high level, like I said, we talked about professionals like Tony Gonzalez who show up, they're on time, they're ready to work. Steve is the exact same way. And then also Steve is a beast in the weight room and he puts up the weight in the weight room. So he's a guy that works really hard. He's had a great career. And just being around him, I just saw how to move as a professional and just what you do, when you're the face of a franchise like he was with the Rams. You're just always on your P's and Q's, but also at the same time, you're a leader. You're somebody that people look to in uncertain times or just trying to see what they should do in certain situations. So Steve is awesome. Nothing bad to say about Steve. Only that he went to Oregon State. He could have went to Oregon, but outside of that, he's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it was 2013 was a tough year for the Falcons. It would end up being your best year statistically. You had another couple touchdowns that season. What was kind of after that season going into the next season? That's like a big year for NFL contracts, right? For the way that I believe it's just because after you hit that fourth year, you're trying to get that second contract, and then you're also the minimum you can get paid goes up, right? You get that vet minimum, which most teams try to avoid that, right? So what is your expectation going into that fourth year, and talk about how that year went for you?
Honestly, I never really it's your upcoming contract, but my thing was I just always wanted to stay in Atlanta. And I think that's the thing. Like I was like, I like it here. I'm used to it here. Like I think I'm doing a good job. Like I would love to stick around here. The crazy thing about going into that contract year is, you talk about it, but that year, the year before when everybody got hurt, I played and I played through an injury. I had an ankle sprain as well. But after we got through with the season, I rested a little bit, got back to working out, and my ankle never really felt 100%. And then I got to the point where I went and got it looked at independently, and I found out that I had a foot fracture. So I found this out in July, though. I thought it was just lingering pain for a while. And I was still at practice doing everything, but it would just be like certain times you're like, oh, that feels nasty, but okay, this is football. This is what we do. So I ended up, having foot surgery right before training camp, which took away most of my season going into it. And I think I ended up playing 5 or 6 games towards the end of the year. And so for me, it really changed because it was something that was unfortunate. And, you can talk to a lot of NFL players, and I'm pretty sure everybody's had some major injury or surgery that they've gone through. But for me, it sucked that it was in my contract year. And it was selfish of me to think that like, yo, I've done good up to this point. I'm pretty sure they'll do right by me and give me a little bag or something. But also at that time, they had I think it was a player option. So they had a chance for a 50-year player option, which was, to match whatever anybody gave me as an unrestricted free agent or something like that and bring me back in. They didn't end up doing that, but that was another bad year for us with Atlanta, just as far as like trying to find our identity, trying to push through what we were doing. And I think we still had a chance to win the division. I think we got down to play Carolina in the last game of the season. I think we're both like 7-7 or something like that, 7-8, and the winner wins the division. So we had a chance. We had a chance for it up until the end. But it just shows you how football, you never know. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's just real tough. Like our division was real tough around that time, having Drew Brees with the Saints and Tampa, and then having Cam Newton up in Carolina. But it pretty much just taught me like, yo, you never know what's going to happen as far as the injury, surgery, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't mean it's the end of the road as far as if Atlanta didn't pay me. But you see how big that is. And that's why a lot of running backs are, afraid when they're going into their last year of their contract, as it's been the last couple of years, and why the teams don't want to pay them. And we can talk about that another time, but just that in general, I went in with the mindset that last year to just do the best I could. And I was like, if this what God wants this will happen. And apparently it wasn't, and we are able to move in a different direction. But it really shows how hard it is to hang on in the NFL and in professional leagues, because sometimes it isn't about if they like you, if they like your work or anything like that. Sometimes it's just strictly about numbers and money.
Yeah, it is a crazy business. Man, you just couldn't avoid playing against Cam Newton, huh? He's just following you.
Destroyed me.
So at what point did you know like when that came and like the end of that season, and I guess what happens, like the phone just stops ringing, like you're not getting called back to the Falcons, you're not getting calls from other teams. Like what is that process like? And then when did you decide to transition into the next chapter of your life?
Yeah, so I found that out in February of that next year. My agent gave me a call and he said Atlanta's most likely not gonna, renew your contract, so you're a free agent. So we're gonna hit the free agent market. I thought, okay, cool. And then after that, nobody really called. You kind of sometimes you're. I was watching. It's funny. I was watching the free agent day in the NFL, the free agent frenzy, I think they call it. And you see guys getting paid, or you see other guys in the same position you are. And you're like, okay, that person got picked up and paid, so I'm pretty sure I will. And that's just the hard thing. It's just like it's a little like basketball, but basketball, you see, I'm not gonna say any names, but you'll see a player get, a 75 contract for 75 or 175 million, and he's, averaged 5 points over the last couple of years. So I try not to put myself in that position and say, hey, this guy got paid and this guy's still playing. I should still be that guy. And later on that off season, I was still training, still working out, started to work a couple jobs just in case things didn't work out the right way. And I remember I hurt myself training. I remember I think I pulled a hamstring. And so around that time, I want to say it was Kansas City that called once we were getting closer to camp, or once they were in camp, and I just wasn't 100%. So I'm like, I can't really go into a camp at 75% and expect that I'm going to make a team. And I also knew that sometimes when somebody gets hurt in camp, they bring in another person. It doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, we want you to make this roster. It's like we need bodies. And so I had to think about that as well. I was like, well, am I going here just to go here for a week and or 3 days until they make the next cut? And so my body just never got back fully to where it was. I had two knee scopes that off season. I had some cartilage in my knee that was loose, and I didn't bounce back quickly from those. So it was something I had to take into account as far as like, all right, well, my body's not 100%. I still want to play, but it's not at where I needed to be to go and be efficient somewhere. So I had to be real to myself, honestly, and I had to say, all right, if I'm not at 100%, am I going to go somewhere and try to play and risk getting hurt even more, or just risk putting bad film or just bad stuff out there for Drew Davis?
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. It's a tough reality for sure. So when did you decide to get in to coaching and to start pursuing that journey? Because I think I saw you you were part of the Central Florida team, coaching over there, like reunited with Scott Frost. What was that like?
Correct. It was an awesome time going there. Scott Frost coached me for my final 2 years at the University of Oregon. He's a great coach, and he's really a down to earth guy. I was actually coaching high school football at that time, just volunteering and helping out where I could. And I actually got a call from Coach Frost, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm chilling. What do you need?" He's like, "Hey, I might have a position open down here, a graduate position." And he's known I haven't wanted to coach, but he was like, I know you want to get into kind of player development and the staff role on administration. He was like, but we might have this position open for you. And if you can come, you can work on your master's. And then after that, if we have the position open, then, you can interview for it and we can see what happens. I'm like, okay, cool. Go down there to Central Florida, and there's something out in the water out there in Florida. I just love the athletes out there. You could have a 2 or 3 star guy in Florida be a 4 or 5 star in California or Colorado or something. And we were really good at recruiting, but they also just the guys love football down there. And so even though we were playing in the AAC, we had a lot of talented dudes and we had some great coaches. And we go undefeated that year. All those coaches want to go to Nebraska. I'm 28, black. I'm like, I don't really think Nebraska's the best place for me right now. Um, but it was awesome being down there in Florida, being at a school that was, and being in Oregon is a big conglomerate school. It's a Power Five school. You look at it, they have all the things they need. And to go to a place like UCF where they, had some success in football, but they aren't that known with football, and to get that hype and buzz started and build it again, It was awesome. And then we took care of Auburn. So that's the one thing I will say. We did
There
beat
we go.
Auburn in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. So I'm 1-1 against Auburn in my lifetime, and I'm cool with that right now.
Yeah, when I interviewed Shaquem Griffin, he was telling me that from his perspective, like the coach before Scott Frost, I was like not letting him play, not doing anything. He said when Scott Frost came, it changed everything for the whole program. I mean, especially for him, where he was able to play. Like, what was it like coaching Shaquem Griffin and having someone like that on the team?
And so, yeah, so I coach running back. So, like, I watch the defense and I see them. I saw NFL potential in him when I watched the practice for him. And it was a matter, that's why I explained to a lot of my clients and student athletes, like, when you play defense, like, a lot of the time you get good things that happen to you from having a high motor and from running to the ball. And this dude was doing that, like, in practice. We're doing, on air, or we're doing, what was it, team pass or something like that. And like I said, he's outside linebacker, so he's rushing. He's rushing the quarterback and then running to go get the ball and still making it to touch the dude down and everything. And I'm like, and he's exerting all this energy in practice. And I think that comes a little bit from, like he said, the coach not letting him play and all that before Scott Frost, and then Scott Frost kind of, when you don't have something and then somebody gives it to you, you look at that and you're like, all right, cool. I'm gonna show you what I can do with this. And I think that's what he did for the time we were at UCF. And even when he went to the NFL, making plays, grabbing one-handed interceptions, like, that's talent.
Yeah, it seemed like just a fun program and the best time of Central Florida to be part of that team. That seemed like an amazing time. So then, yeah, you were saying that you were more wanting to get into like not as much coaching, but more of like from the personal side, from your experience of like the psychology and sports psychology. So then I saw you go and actually become the director of player development, right, at UCLA, back with Chip Kelly. So you're just back reuniting with old coaches. What was that experience like, and how did you like that gig?
That experience was very good. I had a great director of player development when I was at Oregon. His name was James Harris. He went with Coach Kelly to Philadelphia, and then now he works in Major League Baseball. And I saw the impact of just having, a young black dude or just a young guy around you, that really cared for you, that he cares about football, but he more so cared about you as a person. And he was a person that I would come to, when I tore my ACL, or he was a guy's office that everybody would stop into and clown on and just, spend 5 or 10 minutes there on their way to class or meetings or anything like that. And so having that kind of person in the building is game changing, because sometimes the players don't always want to talk to the coaches. Sometimes the players need an outlet of somebody to come talk to about serious stuff, about non-serious stuff, and things like that. So I knew, with the position, I know there's great coaches on the field handling everything, but there needed to be somebody off the field that was the same way when it came to their lives and what was going on with them personally. And I took that, and I really wanted to do that because I had somebody that was really good at that for me. And so anytime you're taking over a new program, it's tough. And I saw that at Central Florida with what they talked about. But when I went to UCLA, because there's some players that don't want to be there. There's some players that are stuck in the ways of what they did before you got there. And they're like, nah, we're going to do it this way. And as you know, Coach Kelly's a disciplinarian. And so he's like, if you don't want to do it this way, you need to get out of here. And so we're losing players, or people are transferring and whatnot, which is real common in college football now. But then you have to go out there and play with what you have. And so you start building from the ground up. But it was really great because we got to recruit the type of guys that we wanted to see brand and wear what the UCLA logo and be a Bruin. And so you really control the type of guys that come in there and the type of interactions you have with them. And I can honestly say that UCLA, we had some very, very good kids who were very, very good athletes. You didn't have to worry about them off the field too much. And I just got to continue to build relationships with them, with their families, with what they had going on in their lives, and kind of be a support system of which I've had my whole life to them.
So how does that playing that role transition to what you're doing now with your quality over quantity, like life coaching and consulting?
It's kind of the same thing. It's just a matter of you're helping people get to a certain place. I think my background in sports, being a student athlete, playing at a Division I school, playing professionally, you can sit here and you can talk to students and parent or student athletes, parents, families, and you can talk about what's expected at the next level. And I can try to help implement that for them right now, as far as saying, okay, well, I start off with simple stuff. Did you make your bed this morning? No, I didn't do it. Okay, why not? Yeah, I just wonder. Okay, well, if you like you talked about with Tony, just doing the small, simple things and continue to build on those. So if you tell me you wake up in the morning and don't make your bed, then how are you going to show up to practice and stretch 15 minutes before every day? Like it starts like that. So I'm able to help them reach their goals, and it's not always sports related, but it's somebody that challenges them and sees exactly what do you want to do with your life. Okay, how can I help you get there? And kind of acting like a mentor and help bridging that gap to where you're helping student athletes even transitioning from high school if they don't go play college ball or if they don't make it to the NFL. How are the things that you gain from football? How are you going to use those in your life to be able to continue to move forward and be successful at some other things? And so those are a lot of things I've taken with me from being a director of player development. You're about the whole well-being of the student athlete or the person you come into contact with and helping them be the best person that they can be.
Yeah, I mean, that's super important for everybody. And some people have people that play those roles as their parents or siblings or coaches, but some people don't have anyone that's in their corner at all. And that's super important. But what does the business side of that look like?
The business side, I try to work with more schools and universities now and organizations. Right now, I do a lot of one-on-one stuff, and I like that because if you start to get into universities, you start to deal with ulterior motives as far as, hey, we want you to come in and talk to this guy, and I have a patient-client confidentiality, so they're like, hey, what did he say? I can't talk about it. So from that side, but it's pretty much it's one-on-one coaching. It's one-on-one coaching with life coaching, with performance coaching, teaching guys what they can do on the field, self-talk, imagery, visualization, body scans are some of the few things I do with my professional athletes, but you're teaching them how to perform at a higher level. And one thing I do with myself, I talk to myself a lot. Like I know how to push myself when I'm on the treadmill. I sometimes, say some very good things about myself when I'm on the treadmill. I sometimes say some very bad things to myself to continue to make myself keep going. It's about trying to help the athletes perform the best way they can, giving them mental training tools and skills that they can use when the bullets are flying per se. So the business model of that is just trying to help people find what they need. Performance coaching has gotten really big over the last couple of years. You hear a lot more about it, but more so, I want people to learn more and figure out what works for them and what's out there to be taught and learned in the space of performance coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to sum up your whole journey. Like the way that your path and your journey kind of align perfectly with what you're doing now. I think that's super special. Like just the adversity that you dealt with and the ways that you found to deal with it with yourself and now being able to give back. I feel like that's the whole great thing about sports and the whole full circle of it. So Drew, that's all the questions I got for you. Was there anything else you wanted to say or where can the people find you or anything else you want to plug?
Man, everybody can find me at Drew Jay Davis on Instagram, Twitter, probably LinkedIn, anything like that. But the most part, I'm doing more mentoring now. So if you got a young man or a student athlete that's in high school, middle school, college, starting up some mentor sessions here in the fall because I feel like I haven't been doing enough as far as reaching out and doing some things to help some people. So if you want some mentoring, just go to my website. You can get there through my Instagram or my LinkedIn. It is Q over Q by Drew.com. And just fill out a contact sheet and I'll get back to you. But just want to do more to try to help the youth and to help other athletes to perform the best they can on and off the field. So I'll be looking forward to that. And I hope everybody's reading a book this summer and just continuing to fill your head with knowledge.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and recapping your journey and giving everybody the opportunity to share your knowledge with them as well. So that's all I got for you. And that's a show.